Hello everyone, realBluTV here, and once again another CMG $8,000 qualifier has been concluded. We have now two more teams that will enter into the main bracket, and those teams being ErichGonnaGetYa and LFO, which stands for Looking for Oregon. We're going to dive right into this bracket, and we're going to talk about some of these matchups that we saw both on the CMG stream and some matchups that I was looking forward to that were off the stream beforehand. And coming into this, I told you guys after the third and fourth qualifiers, as we just wrapped up the fifth, after that third and fourth qualifier, I gave you guys a list of some potential teams to look out for in this next qualifier, and maybe even some of the others if they maybe have another bad bracket or some bad luck in some of their matches. Those teams that I listed in the last video were LFO, F4L, Forsaken, Area Code, Boogeymen, and Sagang. Sagang unfortunately didn't have such a great time in this tournament, I believe, as they were only able to make it to the second round. But let's go ahead and let's jump right into some of these matches that we want to talk about. And a good amount of teams showed up. We saw all Caps Lock make it back into the tournament. They ended up losing to Locked In Roco, which is another team that ended up coming back into the tournament as well. This time, Jay Grav back on that team, as he is not playing with F4L anymore. I think Truancy is no longer with F4L either. So of the four that they came in the last two tournaments with, we will only see Moho and Holiday for that squad at the moment that I think of. But Lossy, T.Stunna, and Comic Book coming in with Locked In Roco. They had Lossy before. I can't remember if T.Stunna was playing with this team at least one other time, but we do see Comic Book, and we saw him on a different team earlier in some other matchups in the other qualifiers, and he played great on the Fixer. So now J-Grab doesn't really have to play that Fixer, which is one of the questions that we possibly were asking. Does he have to play that for F4L? Or, you know, we saw Holiday on it, but J-Grab was playing the rogues that Holiday was more comfortable with when F4L was a little bit more successful early on in some of these brackets. So now we know Comic Book will be on that Fixer most likely for them. They went up against all Caps Lock, which, by the way, did pick up Truancy, and also they picked up Transonics. And I know Dragonox is an insane player. He's probably one of the best free agents out there right now, unless he's going to continue playing with all Caps Lock and nobody breaks up off of this team or gets dropped between now and the next qualifier, which is qualifier number 6 on December 10th. Also, Rome, one of those strong players. And I also want to apologize to Rome. I got really confused, and I kind of said that he's the one that's been doing all these community tournaments. Shout out to him for trying to build up the community and get some more good games out there for everyone to not only watch but to compete in themselves as teams. So big shout out to him. I accidentally said it was Domes when I was casting the Morningstar Grand Finals in qualifier number 2. So that's a big mistake by me. I wanted to apologize to Rome for that, because I got very confused. Rome, Dome, I see it on my Twitter timeline a lot, so I kind of got a little confused. I'm also battling what I think is a cold. I don't have any symptoms of COVID or anything else, just a little sinus pressure, and it's literally driving me insane. So again, I apologize for that. But Transonics, one of those early Smite console players that I was accustomed to watching, and I think he won some worlds with Astral Authority, if I'm correct. If not, let me know in the comments below. But Transonics stepping into the Rogue Company realm and playing with this team. Unfortunately, they did lose to Locked In Roco, but Locked In Roco not making it past, you know what I'm saying, which is one of those teams that made it all the way to the semifinals, and we'll talk about that matchup we saw on the CMG stream here in a second. Some other noticeable teams that made it into the bracket but didn't make it as far were Yastu. Once again, we see them. We see Suspod again. Trash Bags and Strikeout Boys. I don't know if that is 2 or maybe 3 of the members from the actual Strikeout Boys team that did pretty well in the past 2 tournaments. So if it is, we saw them once again. They ended up making it all the way to the quarterfinals and also lost to, you know what I'm saying. Another team that really stood out to me was Forsaken. They actually probably had the hardest run through this bracket. As you can see, they actually had to deal with some pretty intense teams. First of all, in round 2, they had to go up against F4L, and this time F4L was using Moho and Holiday, of course, but they picked up Liddy and Donnie G. I think he was one that came from the original Eastbound team early on in the CMG appearance of Rogue Company. He was doing pretty well. I think he is a good player, so he might fit into the F4L composition a little bit better than some of the other players that Moho and Holiday have been playing with. And Liddy, also one of those good players, so be looking forward to see what F4L can do in some future tournaments coming up, as there's only 3 more chances for them to qualify into the main bracket for the 8K. Meanwhile, on the side of Forsaken, we saw Who's Dat A once again. We saw Colt, Vapor, and Goxley. This team was doing very, very well. They even made it pretty far into the bracket. And again, they pretty much were fed to the dogs and had to go through a gauntlet. They had to take down F4L. That's a tough matchup in itself. Then they had to go up against a team named Let's Run It. They were able to take them down. And then they met their match in ErichGonnaGetYa. Now, remember in the last video, I said you had to watch out for a team named Boogeymen? Well, Boogeymen came back, just not with that name. They actually picked up 2 different players as well, but still some players that I have heard and know of. So ErichGonnaGetYa was the old Boogeyman squad that had Emit Pain, Trenzik, Skeppy, and Wonderful. Skeppy and Wonderful, 2 of their friends that came over from Paladins with Pain and Trenzik, but this time those 2 weren't playing. They replaced them with another Paladins player that also won 2 world championships playing Paladins, one of those with Emit Pain, and that would be Sir James Parker. And then they bring in Delina, who I've seen in a couple CMG tournaments off and on. He's played pretty solid for himself, just hasn't had much success as a team. Does have 1 gold trophy, as you can see, though. So this team making it very deep into the bracket. They took Forsaken won game 2, so they were taken to a game 3 there, and then they ended up winning game 3. So look for Forsaken to do some big things in the next bracket, especially considering they had to go up against a gauntlet of those teams that they did. But let's talk about some of the matches we saw on the stream. First of all, we saw Status Quo up against Sour Patch Kids. That was our round 3 matchup that we saw. And Status Quo, they looked better. The first map was Skyfell. It was a 2-0 in favor of Status Quo. They played Skyfell and Windward. On Skyfell, Status Quo had better retakes on the defensive side. And when Status Quo was shooting enemies together as a team, that's when they would win more rounds. If they were getting caught in their 1v1s, that's when they were losing their rounds. So they just got to step it up on the 1v1 aspect of things, because that's going to happen. You're going to get stuck in some 1v1s at certain situations. So if you lose those every single time, it's not going to look good for your end result. And Sour Patch Kids, they had rapid plants on Skyfell. They were planting very, very, very fast. Like within the first 20 seconds of the round, they just weren't able to hold their positions and hold the angles as perfectly as they'd like, so they ended up losing, and the better retakes were, of course, from Status Quo. On Windward in game 2, Status Quo was not getting juked on the Sour Patch Kid rotations more so than they were, or in similar situations like they were on the Skyfell map. And Sour Patch Kids, they were playing much slower for their plants, and they weren't trying to plant as fast as they were in game number 1, and they were kind of waiting for those picks. Sour Patch Kids still played decently, but Status Quo, I have to give big props to them. We talked about them, I think, in the first recap, maybe the second one. After they would lose rounds, they'd start to argue in those in the plains before the next round began, and it just continued and continued into the round, and that really got into their heads. It took their focus away. They kind of cleaned that up. The comms were much better from them as well if you were watching their actual streams and not the CMG one. So they played better, and not only did they play better, they communicated better, and they were able to brush mistakes past, and hopefully they will go back and revisit those after the bracket was completed and not during the game. And so big shout outs to them. The next matchup we saw in the matches was LFO versus Red River Gang, and that was in the quarterfinals. Red River Gang, not one of those teams that we are familiar with. They do have a kid named Banksy, Howl, Raccoon, and Sorrows Live. Not too familiar with Howl and Banksy's play or Raccoons, but I have seen Howl and Banksy's name pop up a few times in the scene already. Sorrows Live, I've seen him play a few times. Not a bad player, but not a great player at this moment. Hopefully this team can stick together, figure out what the problems were. They did end up losing to a team that made it to grand finals in LFO, so you've got that going for for you if you want to look at some positive notes outside of the game itself. But on Icarus in game 1, both teams, they used a Dahlia and a Scorch combination on attack. And, you know, they were immune to fire. Both teams are going to bring out Vi's most likely. We see a lot of Vi in every single game that we've watched so far through the qualifiers, and she brings a Molotov to the table. So that could potentially turn some fights around, as not only just Scorch is immune to it, but also the Dahlia. Both teams running that. LFO controlled the A site super successfully, whether they were on defense or attack, so that worked out in their favor. Very much so. They also, on their pistol round of attack, they went towards B pretty fast, and with the Scorch were able to get the plant, and successfully. She actually, Chapo was playing that Scorch, and in that pistol round, she was able to get her ability twice. So that's how long that fight lasted in round 1, and how fast he actually activated the ability or the ultimate coming into the round, into the initial fight to begin with. And I know a lot of you have been asking for some replays or maybe some clips that happened during this. I'm working on it. Don't worry. It's just, you know, I've been feeling a little under the weather, but I still got to get these out for you guys. The next matchup we saw was also a good one. It was in the semifinals. This time, you know I'm saying, versus ErichGonnaGetYa. And this match was a doozy, actually. We went all 3 games. On Favelas was game 1. Parker and Payne, their chemistry, or, you know, I call them Parker and Payne, but Emit Payne and Sir James Parker, or SJP, whatever you want to say. Their chemistry is still there from when they played Paladins together. Remember, I said they won a world championship at LAN, at DreamHack Atlanta together on a Paladins team, and they were both DPS players. Payne was a flex. He had to play whatever the team needed in that composition at the time, but still DPS heavy-minded in himself, and along with SJP, who was playing that flex tank into the DPS as well at the time. But nonetheless, this is Rogue Company, but their chemistry together is still there. They were running the Dahlia Fixer combo. You know, the double shooting was there. The callouts were there. They were able to play off of each other super well. And ErichGonnaGetYa, I'm just going to call him Eggy. That's basically what the acronym is there. But Eggy turned, you know I'm saying, strats against them into the later rounds. They would, you know, they were kind of like sponges. They would soak up what was working against them and then start to turn it against their opponent. So a little mind games being played there with the strats as well, and it was very interesting to see how that took place. Game number 2 was on High Castle. Both teams attacked nicely with good holds, but Eggy was able to get A plants for free multiple times, even without any gunfire happening. But the better retakes is when it counts, came from, you know what I'm saying, they were able to push it to a 6-6, and then they ended up winning that game off of an A retake, after they started to notice that the A plants were a little free too much and too often. They retook A, and they were able to win that game and push it to a game 3, which, by the way, we went to Canals. Eggy was holding B lanes perfectly and getting beautiful retakes for the defuses pretty much off of the back of Payne. Emit Payne just took over that game in the later rounds, especially on attack for great bomb holds, and with the fixer in his hand, he was getting nutty shots. C4s were happening. He was even, you know, placing them on top of Propane on B and just waiting for someone to try and ego chow on the top of that, which happened twice when they were trying to get the plant down. So even though Trenzik on the Anvil would go in there and get killed pretty fast on the plant, Dahlia was able to regain that control along with the rest of the team, and they played beautifully through that last game on Canals. And then, of course, we move into the grand finals where we saw ErichGonnaGetYa versus LFO, and this was a very great match to watch. Oh my goodness, super entertaining. Even the casters were marveling in wonder during the time that it was happening in front of our eyes. Both teams played amazingly. They did go to game 3. Game 1 was on lockdown. Eggy just adjusted better mid-game. They dominated the B site on both attack and defense. That led them to being able to win that lockdown match. Then on Windward, LFO, they knew exactly how to set up the retakes before even needing to retake. But Eggy was kind of adjusting a little faster each round as it went on. But Eggy def holds on to a shaky B site rotations. Or their defense was a little shaky, especially on the B site rotations. So because of those sloppy rotations, they allowed LFO to pick them off one by one and take the victory, force the game number 3. And that's where we went to Skyfell. And this game was just as close until the tilt factor started to come in for LFO. I mean, Eggy was still winning the regroups after losing members. They'd be down in numbers in the fights, but they would still regroup as a unit and still push in together, clear out angles together, and they were able to get the picks that they needed. Magnus, for the side of LFO, was pretty much carrying. And when that happens, you may think it's a good thing because he's a great player, but more so not from the anecdotal data that I've been compiling over these qualifiers is when Magnus is doing great, like in lockdown of this matchup as well, the rest of the team is kind of falling behind, and it puts a lot of pressure on Magnus. When you see Detox losing that sniper battle against Pain, then Magnus and Chapo have to put a lot more pressure on themselves, and Neg as well. Neg was playing pretty much out of his mind on the anvil that game, especially on the offensive side. I think there was a round where he got an ace, and then there was a couple defensive rounds where he did some big things with just a pistol, especially after they lost a pistol round on defense too. But LFO was getting caught out in baits on attack way too often and setting up these 2v1 situations that were just over in a heart or over in a blink of an eye in favor of ErichGonnaGetYa. And also, you know, like I said, the tilt started to come into play. I think they were down 5-3 or maybe 5-4, or maybe it was a little worse than that, but the tilt factor started to come in, and you can actually hear the comms from LFO, and they were arguing that those arguments would continue into the next round, so the focus wasn't really there. The comms weren't as crisp as they should have been, and because of that, they started to lose round after round after round, and the frustration just showing through even on the CMG stream. So if they're able to clean that up, they'll be able to make some better plays and some better decisions and capitalize on making less mistakes while they capitalize on the enemy's mistakes. And if you want a perfect example, like I said, status quo, they cleaned that up. If you go back in the past couple qualifiers, they had those problems and they were losing pretty early on. They made it as deep, they made it the deepest they have in one of these qualifiers just now, and they were able to clean that up. So that's pretty much all there is for this last qualifier that just happened. So if I'm you and I'm asking, what teams do I need to look at for the next qualifier, which will be qualifier number 6? Of course, you have to look at teams like Status Quo. You know what I'm saying? I think Forsaken will be one of those top 4 teams as well. I think Area Code has been improving as well. And another team, F4L, we'll see if they're able to pick up the play or if they'll change their roster once again. And maybe even Locked in Roco could sneak their way into a prime position to make a play for the qualifiers as well. And if you want to see what the main bracket is looking like right now, remember this will be double elimination, 16 teams. So, of course, SDK, that number 1 seed. But we do have 2 matchups that were decided after today's qualifiers, the 9th and 10th seed. And because ErichGonnaGetYa won that qualifier tonight, they will get that 9th seed. So they'll be playing Evade Us in the first round of the main bracket. And then, of course, LFO, being the 10th seed, will go up against Fix the Fixer, the 7th seed in that first bracket. So ErichGonnaGetYa, if they're able to beat Evade Us, or whichever ones wins out of that, will most likely have to see Shoot to Kill in the next round. And then between LFO and Fix the Fixer, most likely we'll have to play Tier 1. I know a lot of people suggesting and enforcing their opinions that STK and Tier 1 will be in the grand finals. Remember, it is double elimination, but this is what the bracket's looking like right now. Qualifier number 6 will determine the 11th and the 12th seed, which would be whoever wins the next qualifier would be matched up against RTND, and then the second place team from that bracket will go up against PMP. Both really good teams. So I don't know which one I'd choose to go up against because they're both great, but hey, that's pretty much it